If you've seen our videos before, you'd know that we, well, half of us, absolutely love Nintendo. But that doesn't mean they're perfect. Despite single-handedly reviving the entire gaming industry after the market crash of 1983, the Big N has made a lot of mistakes, some that even affect him to this day. I'm CrashLove37 and I hope your body is ready for CrashLove Gaming's top 10 Nintendo fails. The Virtual Boy was terrible. You know it, I know it, Nintendo knows it. Released in 1995, was this supposed to be a replacement for the Game Boy? The Nintendo 64 was only a year away, and the Game Boy was 10 years old at this point, so that's the only thing that makes sense. But how could they have thought that this thing would be portable? Everything about the Virtual Boy just screams bad design. The way you have to lean into the headset, the retina-destroying black and red color scheme, this controller. It was rushed to market, actually caused ocular damage, and only released a handful of games. The saddest part is that the Virtual Boy was one of the last things legendary developer and inventor Gunpei Yokoi worked on before his resignation and untimely death. Power Glove, Laser Scope, Wii Sports, everything. These are terrible accessories that do not count for this entry. I'm talking about official first-party Nintendo peripherals and add-ons, like the Famicom sewing machine. We in the West were actually spared quite a bit of awful ideas in the past. The Famicom 3D system, which was their first failed attempt at a 3D headset, actually doesn't look that much different from the PlayStation VR headset. The 64 disk drive, which had some cool looking games but ultimately didn't even last a year on the market. The massive, battery munching Super Scope, anything that let you talk to your games. The Wii Vitality Sensor, that didn't even make it to production. You might be wondering why I didn't mention Rob, but that little guy is actually the reason retailers would even stock the NES after the aforementioned market crash, so the good definitely outweighs the bad here. Controllers and console features aren't so bad, as usually there's an option for something more traditional, but that's not always the case for games. Star Fox, for example. They've been making the same game for 15 years. Why did they change one of the most solid things about it? Twilight Princess is a great game, but not when I have to kill enemies like this. Before the HD remake, if you wanted to play it correctly, you had to pay up for the GameCube version. I've already said a lot about the Wii U in a previous Crash Talk, but to summarize, it was a colossal failure. The follow-up to the massively popular Wii failed to deliver in multiple ways. A half-generation console being released only a year before the PS4 and Xbox, it seems Nintendo couldn't figure out how to sell it. Not powerful enough for the gamer market, but too similar to the Wii for the casual market. Third-party developers jumped ship soon after a poor launch, and continued to ignore the Wii U in favor of Microsoft and Sony's much more powerful machines. Despite having some truly fantastic games, the Wii U would never recover from a botched launch and drought of strong first-party titles for almost a full year. Nintendo was always used to having a more powerful console, but that didn't help them past the 16-bit era. The lack of loading times wasn't enough to give cartridges the advantage over the PlayStation's CDs. The largest N64 game could fit into a single CD over 10 times, and many of the PS1's best games were on multiple discs. Not only were cartridges much smaller, but they were way more expensive to produce. Some of the greatest games of all time were on the N64, but the loss of Final Fantasy was devastating. The GameCube was more powerful than the PlayStation 2, but many people seem to forget this due to the overwhelming success of the PS2, mostly due to its DVD capabilities. The GameCube game disc had only a third of the storage space of a DVD, but even if they were larger, the inability to play DVDs and the growth of online gaming pushed Nintendo's console sales into further decline. It sucks when you can't get what you want. Nintendo fans know this all too well. The Wii was a surprise hit released just before the holidays, so it's understandable that it was in short supply. Amiibo were a sure thing, a relatively inexpensive Nintendo collectible showcasing the characters in the immensely popular Smash Bros. Series. What could go wrong? Nintendo. Nintendo could go wrong. I kind of understand their reasoning here. Zelda, Mario, and Pokemon were way more popular than Fire Emblem, Animal Crossing, and Wii Fit. So in a way it makes sense to not produce as many Marths as Links, but collectors went crazy trying to find these things and scalpers made a killing. Even if Fire Emblem was just starting to rise in popularity, Marth is a very well known and popular character in the Smash community, and he looks like an anime. A lot of people pay way more than $13 for an anime figure. The rare Amiibo eventually got reprinted, but the same can't be said about the NES Classic. I don't understand how Nintendo missed the mark so hard on this one. It's an official Nintendo developed plug and play console that looks and feels exactly like the NES. They sold out immediately and discontinued it. They could have made so much money if they had just produced more, unless they were just trying to build hype before the Switch launch. And speaking of the Switch, I know it was released in March, but they could have had a few more ready. Not even everyone that pre-ordered received one, and they've been slowly trickling back into stores since. I also made a video about that, so check it out. This one is huge. I would have placed it at number 1, but it actually wasn't entirely Nintendo's fault, and there are too many variables to be able to predict what would have happened had the deal gone through. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Nintendo had a deal with Sony to create a disk drive add-on for the SNES, kind of like the Sega CD. A lot of shadiness happened behind the scenes on both Nintendo and Sony's part, but the deal got scrapped. Sony went on to create the PlayStation, and Nintendo partnered with Philips to create, this. Well, Nintendo wasn't directly involved, but if the deal with Sony was successful, this would have never happened. Great! Even though Nintendo somewhat created their biggest competitor, I didn't put this at number 1 because there's no way to know what would have happened beyond the SNES add-on. Would their first 3D era console have been more similar to the N64, or would it have been more like the PlayStation? Would Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time still have played as well as they did if they had loading screens? What would the console market look like today with no competition? Because let's be real here, a Nintendo console with the third-party support of the PlayStation would have absolutely dominated anything that stood against it. Unfortunately, we'll never know because Sony got greedy and Nintendo were control freaks. One of the main features that set the PS3 and 360 apart from the Wii was online functionality. Sure, the Wii could go online and even play some good games of Mario Kart, but it was nothing compared to what Sony and especially Microsoft were doing to connect players across the world. Arbitrary friend codes instead of usernames, no Ethernet port, poor lobby implementation, no party chat. The Wii's Wi-Fi was mostly designed to let users purchase virtual console games. The Wii U stepped it up a little bit with usernames in Miiverse, but continued to fail with no party chat, minimal matchmaking, still no Ethernet port, and the most impractical method of playing games online with friends. I'd say it was even worse than the PS3 in that regard. We still don't know much about how the Switch will function online, but we know that it will cost money and party chat will be done through a smartphone, or something. I don't know. Get it together, Nintendo. Microsoft had this figured out over a decade ago. Going back to the market crash of '83, it was a bad time to be a game developer. Due to a lack of standards and public reviews, almost anyone could color some pixels and sell it as a game, and you wouldn't know how bad it is until after you bought it. So when the NES blew up, Nintendo was very strict regarding what could be released on their console. Cartridges needed a proprietary lockout chip that Nintendo would license to developers, and there was a limit to how many games a publisher could release. There were all these hoops that had to be jumped through just to get a game out there, and there was nothing they could do about it because Nintendo had a monopoly on the industry. Even with the Genesis cutting in on their market share, Nintendo still had developers like Capcom, Konami, and Squaresoft putting some of their best games on the SNES. It wasn't until the Sony PlayStation that Nintendo started losing support. The previously mentioned cost of developing for the N64, coupled with the years of strained relationships, all those third-party developers left for Sony. Instead of Symphony of the Night, we got Castlevania 64. Instead of Final Fantasy VII, we got nothing. This lack of third-party support would continue into the Wii, where everyone dumped their motion-controlled garbage, hoping a clueless parent would buy it. The bigger problem was that the Wii's vastly inferior hardware made it near impossible to port games from the 360 and PS3, but the third-party drought would pick up again for the Wii U. At least things are looking up for the Switch. Hopefully. This might seem like an odd choice for number 1, especially after those last few, but hear me out. Back in the early 90s when Sega was hitting hard with advertising the Genesis as a more mature console than the SNES, Nintendo was removing the blood from Mortal Kombat. The SNES versions of the Mortal Kombat series were technically superior to the Genesis versions, but they sold much less because of censorship. Not to mention Nintendo was all in with the creation of the ESRB, and even attacked Sega in court over their more adult-oriented games. Even though they've cut back on censorship, going as far as publishing Bayonetta 2 and suggesting less clothing for her Link costume, they've never been able to shake the stereotype that Nintendo games are for kids.
That's like a baby's toy.
That wouldn't be so bad if they didn't live up to it by cutting online functions like in-game chat and discontinuing key features of software like Swap Note because they're afraid of what kids might see or hear. Everyone else shouldn't get less just because some parents can't be bothered to monitor what their kids are doing online. Censorship is bullshit. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this top 10 list. If you feel there should be something else on the list that wasn't there, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Google+, and we'll see you next time.